Hello, BookTube. It's the return of the bouncy cam as we continue with my library tour. This is just about the last shelf I can do without changing the position of the camera, because I won't be stooping out of camera range to do this. So we've got just a normal big shelf of books. So let's go through them, starting with the two transverse books. The first of which is a book depository book. I mentioned, I think yesterday, that I like everybody else on BookTube, I fell in love with Book Depository because it's so quirky and you never know what you're going to find there. The prices aren't a steal, but the shipping is free. And I see things there, they're brand new books. I see things there that I would otherwise wait a decade for to see used. So this is their edition of Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove, which once again I saw on a British BookTube channel. I watch British BookTube channels. I wouldn't be able to if they had the option to ban me. I wouldn't from watching. Then I wouldn't be able to. But they don't have that option, so I get to see them. And I saw somebody hold up this edition and realized right away that I wanted it. So that's another book depository book. And then okay. This next one. All right. So these are two 20th century novels that I absolutely love. And this is a trade paperback that I just love. I was hoping for it. This is Shogun by James Clavell. I just think that's gorgeous. Just a gorgeous trade paperback. I originally saw this in exactly this cover design with the red spine and all as a mass market paperback in a new bookstore. And I actually held it in my hand and thought, no, I bet this will come out as a trade paperback, or is out already as a trade paperback, and that's what I want. And, this, now I have it. So I've had Shogun in many, many different editions, but this is the nicest one, and it's a good, solid, floppy trade paperback, so it will stand me in good stead. And those are the transverse books. Now we'll move on. I wonder how much fiction we'll have on this shelf. Okay, all right. First one is a classic. It is a great... Okay, we have Lonesome Dove and we have Shogun, and they are both, in my opinion, first-rate novels of the 20th century. Lonesome Dove is an actual American masterpiece. Shogun is something else on the spectrum of terrific 20th century novels. It's a fantastic historical novel, one of the best, and it is serious, and it will move you. It doesn't have quite the literary chops of Lonesome Dove, but it's on the same spectrum. And then, as long as we're dealing with 1,000-page historical novels from the 20th century, here's this next one, and it is also on the spectrum. It doesn't have anywhere near the literary chops of, for instance, Shogun, but it is every bit as enjoyable as Shogun and Larry McMurtry, and that is The Great Forever Amber by Kathleen Winsor. Look at this. Look at that cover. I had to have it. I mean, again, I've had this book in many, many, many editions, but that is our author. Oh my. And this is a fantastic historical novel about about a Moll Flanders type woman, let's put it that way, and her adventures in London, and it's just nonstop fun. I loved it. I'm not sure how much its sensibilities would transfer to current year. I have no idea. I think, if I remember correctly, that Olive, at a book Olive, maybe read Forever Amber relatively recently. I don't remember what her reaction was. I think it wasn't entirely positive. I'm in love with the book, so I'm probably not an objective guide anymore. Okay, all right. This is the Fall River remainder edition of Dante's Divine Comedy. It's got a little bit of a garish cover, but that's okay. I have since learned that this same edition is the Barnes & Noble edition, and that if I have an extra $25 knocking around and I go to a Barnes & Noble, I can get a really pretty leather-bound edition of this same thing. And the reason that I want it is because this is the perfect Dante for me. Not only because it's the Henry Wadsworth Longfellow translation, but because it has Gustave Doré engravings all throughout. Not just one or two, but all throughout. It's all of Doré's engravings. So that is the, in the fantasy world in which I can assemble my own classics, in which I can make the cover the way I want, the insides the way they want, the illustrations the way they want, the editions the way they want. This is pretty close. Pretty close to the perfect Divine Comedy for me. Then we have a work of wonky science fiction. This is the encyclopedia, the Dune Encyclopedia, with tons and tons of entries and some original lamentable illustrations. all about the Dune world. I have a copy of this. It's incredibly wonkish reading of all the sorts of behind-the-scenes stuff and the notes and the exposition that Frank Herbert doesn't include in his books. And when I was we're doing a Dune tube. We're doing a read-along of all of Frank Herbert's Dune novels, and at first I thought, well, you're going to need this to consult it, while you're doing Dune tube. And then I thought, no, no. We're just reading the books. Why would I hold a reference work over anybody else? So, but I still love going through it. It's so much fun to imagine, and it's the closest that you're going to get to all of the Dune novels that Frank Herbert might have written. I'm not really interested in the fairly plodding books that his son is co-writing. I would like to see the ones that he would have written, and there are a million stories in this book, just a million of them. Okay, this next one is by Edward Seidensticker. This is Genji Days, slim nonfiction work about basically his writing diary while he was working on his massive translation of the Tale of Genji. And like I mentioned, the last time this author came up, I have a lot of his nonfiction, a lot of his occasional nonfiction like this, because I absolutely love it. I wish that I had a collection of his book reviews and his author essays. I don't even know if such a collection exists. He worked nonstop on his translations, but he did take time out. He worked a lot on what he was doing, but he, like all writers, he was tempted by book section editors and publishers sending books to him and saying, how about a review? And he did a lot of that. And I don't even know if it's all been collected. If you know, please tell me. I would love to try and find that book. Okay, this next one is the Norton Book of the Sea. Big, I think we saw it. I think I hauled this, and it went straight into this room. This is the Norton Book, the Norton Book of. There's a selection of anthologies that they did there. Most of them are absolutely first rate, and this is one of the best ones, and it really interests me because of that. Then let's see here. Oh, okay. All right, this is Louis Cronenberger. This is The Republic of Letters. This does not belong here. Obviously, this belongs behind me in the bookcases on books and about authors and whatnot. But this is from mid-century, I believe, 1955. Yeah, and it has lots of great stuff in it. There's, for instance, it's on my mind now. He has a very good essay on Virginia Woolf as a book critic that I have read many, many times, and it's on my mind now because there's a book published by the TLS, collecting Virginia Woolf's book reviews from the TLS, and I think it's called Ink and Genius or something like that. And I don't have a copy, and I'm never going to have a copy because it's never going to come out in America. So, of course, I desperately want it. Oh, great. Fantastic. This was a gift from Todd at Todd's Bursting Bookcase. He sent me a couple of gifts. We take care of each other in this weird little corner of BookTube. It's really nice. We send each other stuff. The slightest drop of a hat. This is the Essays of George Orwell in a great big Everyman's Library edition that I was talking about Orwell in some reason or other. I was wheezing on about him and mentioned that I didn't have this edition and it's the one I wanted. And there it was in the post. Oh my, oh, you are not in the right place. Oh goodness. This is a Penguin Classic. I have a place for Penguin Classics. This is a Penguin Classic of Li Po and Tu Fu. I don't off the top of my head remember what these two poets are now called. They aren't called Li Po and Tu Fu anymore, but this is a mid 20th century translation into English of their works, plus lots and lots and lots of critical stuff, essays, footnotes, and all that. So well worth having, but doesn't belong here. I'm going to put it aside. It doesn't belong here. Oh my, okay. This is William McKeever's Emperors of the Deep, his natural history of sharks. And also human history of sharks, the history of shark overfishing and demonization and whatnot. I don't agree with that overfishing, of course, and I don't agree with the demonization at all. I do agree with the terror, of course. Of course, you're going to be afraid of an 8-foot-long eating machine that's in the water with you, which is why only a fool would go in the water past their ankles. That's just insane. That the ocean is where sharks live, and a shark is an animal big enough to eat you who's perfectly willing to eat you. So why would you do that? I watch YouTube videos about vacationing couples. They're on a 30-foot boat in the middle of the, broad turquoise sea, and then they put down their beers and just willy-nilly jump off the deck into the water. What on earth? What on earth? Their boat is constantly giving off a trail of garbage that is highly edible. The boat is also constantly providing a 30-foot patch of shade to which fish congregate. In other words, if you have a boat like that and you are out in tropical water or whatnot, you have sharks underneath you, directly underneath you. What on earth are you thinking? Every once in a while, you'll see one of those videos where people will just dump themselves into the water. These big, overweight Americans will dump themselves into the water and be paddling all around like elephants. And somebody on the ship, on the boat, will say, okay, very calmly, I want you to swim very calmly back to the boat, because they have seen a shark in the water. And if you're in the water on the surface of the ocean, you can't see a shark near you. Unless the fin breaks the surface, you can't see it. But anybody with a little elevation can. And this was absolutely fascinating to read, and I also had the pleasure of writing about it, of reviewing it for the Martha's Vineyard Gazette. The vineyard has lots and lots of tourists, lots and lots of vacationers, lots and lots of people who launch pleasure boats like that, launch them at the vineyard, and also a healthy shark population. And I got to review it for the vineyard, so I put my review inside my copy of the book. And the only way that will change is if I get the trade paperback, and if my blurb is printed on the trade paperback, then I will take my review out of this copy, put it in the trade paperback, and keep that edition. But that might not even get a paperback edition, so who knows? Okay, this next one needs to be reinforced. This is falling apart. This is Boston in the Age of John Fitzgerald Kennedy by Walter Muir Whitehill, who was forever and ever the living embodiment of the Boston Athenaeum, and knew in his time everything there was to know about Boston Brahmins, about Boston history, especially about Boston architecture. Book 2, I gotta tell you, the experience of walking down a Boston street with him was, you had to see it to believe it. You had to experience it to believe it. There wasn't anything he didn't know about every inch and brick of Boston. And this was a series of books, all this size, that were put out. And I loved the fact that when it came to it, he called his book this, Boston in the Age of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, instead of 20th Century Boston or Modern Boston or Boston Today or any of the other titles that could have come to mind. He was a delightful man, a delightful storyteller. There was a little back room to a used bookstore here in Boston a long time ago. He was a delightful man. It's a wonderful book. I really need to reinforce the dust jacket before it becomes irretrievable. Okay, this next one is Elizabeth Bowen. I've praised her on this channel just recently because Everyman's Library came out with a gorgeous edition of her short stories. And this is her book, A Traveler in Rome. That is our author on the back there. And it's travel writing. Everybody in the mid-20th century, this was 1935, I think. 1959. Everyone in the mid-century, every person of letters in the mid-century was tapped to write travel writing at some point or other. That was, the age when suddenly cruise ships suddenly became within reach of the middle class. The middle class itself was expanding. Austerity measures were lifting almost everywhere in the West. So travel became a boom. And, there was also air travel that became less expensive and more common. So everybody did this. Everybody did. Nabokov, Mary McCarthy, Elizabeth Bowen, everybody was tapped to do things like these. And some of them are very, very good. I'm a fan of travel writing anyway. Once again, as with Edward Seidensticker, I say, if somebody might be tempted, Everyman's Library just reprinted her short stories. Somebody might be tempted down the line to reprint this. What I would like to see is a reprint, or a printing for the first time, a volume of all of her paid occasional work. It's a form of writing on its own. You can be bad at it. You can also be good at it. If we can do it for Virginia Woolf, we should be able to do it for everybody who did that sort of thing, especially if they made a name elsewhere. Okay, this is also a classic. I don't know. I have no idea where it fits on the spectrum that that I mentioned. I don't think it does. This is Moontusk. Who is the author here? Bruce Grether. This is Moontusk. I will leave my review down below. This is I don't quite know how to describe it. There's a planet with a broken moon, with a moon with rings around it. There are husky men who fall in and out of love with each other. There are telepathic mastodons. It's a weird reading experience. Okay, all right. I mentioned this last time we saw this during the last library tour. I don't know quite why I kept this book. This is a novel about Spartacus by David Anthony Durham. I like the cover design. I like the look of it. I liked the book, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I liked it more than I liked everything else. You know, about Spartacus. I'm not sure about that. Maybe I should reread it in 2020 and see if maybe I'm just forgetting something that really struck me when I had it. But I did keep it, and I do recommend it. I will leave links to anything that I wrote about down below. Some of you seem to like that. I don't know if I ever wrote about the Risen. We shall see. Oh my. Okay, the Diamondback Terrapin is the subject of our next book. This is natural history. This is Barbara Brennessel's Diamonds in the Marsh, a book about turtles that is just a natural history. Look at that. There's the salt marsh. We've been talking about those quite a bit. That is a salt marsh, and it is a wondrous place. Salt marshes are wondrous places. And one of their primary denizens are turtles of all kinds. And this is just a natural history of that one particular kind of turtle. Okay, right. Well, we're sticking with this theme just a bit here. This is Donald Jackson's Life in a Shell. This is a natural history not of one kind of turtle, but of what turtles are. Of turtles, their incredibly long evolutionary history, their adaptations, their variety, that sort of thing. Not a big thing, but I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Pretty sure that I never wrote about this, but if I did, I will look for it and see. And then the last book, oh no, well, all right, you don't belong here either. This is Katherine Ann Porter, who's not all that well known anymore, and this is her collected essays and occasional writing. There is our author. And this is exactly the sort of thing that I was talking about, just to collect all of her book reviews, all of her book essays, her prefaces, her speeches and addresses and whatnot. And the only reason I love the book, I go back to it all the time, the only reason I'm caviling is because it doesn't belong here. Same thing with Louis Cronenberg. It belongs in the bookshelf that we've already been through. All of the books about books. So I'll have to redo this. I am going to redo these with this whole library. So that's it for now. That's it for the bouncy cam for today. Next time I'm going to have to rearrange the tripod to get at the next shelf. But it's a marvel. It's a marvel of a thing. So I'm sure that I can. So I'll wrap this up for now. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.